I told Sandy Felsian, I said, we can't let this music go away, even if we just print it in limited quantities. But that's all changed now with digital printing. There really is no excuse for anything that's published moving forward to ever be out of print. It should be available in some way, whether that's digital or whether that's print on demand.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the great fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all of you for listening. I really appreciate your time, and I hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Everything Band is sponsored by Celtic Horizon Arts, the leading tour operator for the arts in the United Kingdom and Ireland. Celtic Horizon Arts hosts bands, orchestras, and choirs from around the world, and they are now taking inquiries for their 2020 Band Festival in Limerick, Ireland. This festival, featuring composer Johan de May, will include clinics, masterclasses, and cultural exchanges. Bands and individual musicians are all welcome to participate and can find out more by contacting Keith Kelly at keith@CelticHorizonTours.com or find out more on Facebook at Celtic Horizon Arts. Now, on to the episode and this week's guest, Larry Clark. Hi, Larry.
How's it going?
Good. Thanks for joining me. We've been talking about this for a while now.
Yeah, the podcast seems to be getting a lot of importance, and I've seen it a lot on Facebook with people sharing it and things. So that's great. Good for you.
Yeah, it's starting to take off a little bit. I'm pretty proud of the project, and I'm happy to have talked to so many wonderful people about band music and band and music education.
Well, that's the cool part about what we do is, there's a lot of great people, and it's a really tight-knit community.
It is.
And that's what I love about it.
It's and the more I do this, and I'm somewhat recent to the band. I was a college music theory professor, not writing band music, writing other kind of music. And I came to the band genre kind of late. And so, I knew some people, but as I get more involved in the community, just how big and how close it is. It's really remarkable, actually.
It is indeed, yes.
There's too many people to interview for this podcast. That's for sure.
Right. Well, that's good. You got something to do for the rest of your career, right?
Well, I need to start getting paid a little more for it, but
I know. I understand that too.
So, Larry, can you, for those who may not know who you are, can you introduce yourself for the listeners?
Sure. Of course. My name's Larry Clark, and I just started my own company, and I'm the founder and president of my new company called Excelcia Music Publishing, right here in Lakeland, Florida, where I live. And of course, I'm a composer and an author and a former band director and a music educator. And I put all that in there because I really see my role still as being somewhat of a music educator, even though I'm in music publishing. Prior to this recent change, which literally just happened a few weeks ago, I was with Carl Fischer Music as vice president and editor-in-chief for almost 19 years.
Yeah, I think that's how most people know you, as the editor at Carl Fischer and as a composer. If you teach middle school band, you've probably run across a Larry Clark tune at some point in your life.
Very fortunate to say yes to that.
I know I play in a community band every Tuesday night, and we often come across some of your arrangements. They're often in our folders. So
I'm humbled and honored by that.
So, Larry, can you tell everyone your origin story, how you got your start in music, maybe a little bit about your early education and career?
Certainly. I grew up in a little town in Florida called Newport Richey, and I have the good fortune of my dad was a band director. He taught some high school, but he mostly taught middle school. But he was one of those guys that, music was everything. He taught private lessons after school. He played gigs on the weekend. He was just music, pretty much 24/7. And so that's sort of I absorbed that as a kid, and I got involved very early. He actually taught me as sort of a little bit of an experiment. He taught me how to read music, and I learned to play drums first in first grade before I could actually read words. And I always say, I can read music still, but I still can't read very well. So I learned drums first, and then later on in the fifth grade, I switched over to trombone, and then went from there. In high school, I had the good fortune of being in a good high school band in Florida, in small town Newport Richey, and I was drum major of the band, so that kind of got my first experience of doing that sort of thing. My family always played together. All my brothers and sisters were musicians as well. We're in band, we're singers, that sort of thing. So on the weekends, we would play gigs together as a little family dance band. And I played drums most of the time for that, but I did play some trombone as well later on. And I really cut my teeth on transposition. And, my dad would throw a sax book up in front of me and say, well, just play this, add your 3 flats and here you go. Or here's a trumpet part, just transpose it. And so I cut my teeth doing that sort of thing. Later on, I really got inspired in high school with marching band. That sort of was what really got me going into wanting to do music and education as sort of a living. And this is really before I thought about being a composer. But I always tell people I'm sort of the product of the Star Wars generation, I guess you'd say. When that movie came out, and that recording of the London Symphony playing the John Williams music, I just wore that thing out, and I got inspired by all of that. And then of course that led to other things. The other thing that really inspired me, and I've told him many times, is arranger Jay Bocook. When they had the old Jensen marching band recordings, and those recordings were by big college bands. I wore those records out and was just so intrigued with that, and got so excited by the mass sound of that. Then that just sort of inspired me to later consider wanting to write. I didn't do it at this point in time, but I wanted to do it. Of course, then this led to college, and I had the good fortune of being involved at Florida State University in music education, but being involved and around composer Charles Carter, which a lot of people who know music in the school band realm know of his music, things like Overture for Winds and Symphonic Overture and things like that. And then Bentley Schellehammer, who was the marching band director there, who saw something in me and, gave me opportunities to succeed, and really thought that I had a chance to be a good teacher, and so really pushed me in the right direction. During my time at Florida State, I got hooked up in a group called Suncoast Sound Drum and Bugle Corps, which, back in those days, it was a little iffy if you were in drum corps, if that was a good thing or a bad thing. But what it led me to somebody that we all know is Robert W. Smith. Robert was the arranger of that organization, and I obviously learned a ton of things from him. And the same with Charles Carter. I didn't study with either of those guys personally in composition, because at that point I wasn't writing anything. I was really afraid of writing music. I was just scared of the whether I would be able to do it or had the chops. But I just learned a lot from him, looking at his scores and looking at and watching him teach and things like that. So that led me then to, after the Suncoast days, where I was the drum major of the group, and then I actually taught the group until it stopped performing. And then I taught middle school band in the Tampa, Florida area, and cut my teeth doing that. I expected I was going to teach high school band, but I ended up teaching middle school, and I'm really super glad that I did, because I think that gave me the impetus to do what I do today, which and the success of my music, I think, has a lot to do with the fact that I taught those middle school kids, and I know what they liked. I know what they could do. And so I started dabbling with writing music for them. They wanted to, and I started with arranging. They wanted to play things that were on the radio or in a movie or something like that, and it might not have been available yet. So I would scratch something out real quick. Of course, back in those days, it was by hand, and it was really probably pretty bad. But they were like my laboratory, and then they enjoyed the process of working with me on doing that. And that just was inspiring and encouraging to me to take it, one step further. So I taught the middle school thing, and I started to write some for some marching bands local, which sort of led me to more things. And then I went to graduate school and have a master's degree in conducting and composition from James Madison University. And the important thing I want to emphasize throughout this whole story is to me, it's all about the mentors you come in contact with in your career. At James Madison, I had the good fortune of being taught by Dr. Pat Rooney, who was the director of bands there. And he encouraged me in conducting. I was working on conducting then. And he also played some of my arrangements with the marching band there, which obviously helped me a great deal because at that time, James Madison's marching band was outstanding, just incredible. As part of that process, I got led to composition, and their composition teacher was John Hilliard, who studied with Francis Macbeth and Carl Fischer. So a really great band background, but he didn't write a lot of band music. But what was great about John is that he encouraged people to write their music. And he really was great about taking the music you had created and making it better rather than trying to make you write like him. And so that was really awesome. So he was a great mentor in that, and that really inspired me more. From there, I went on to become the marching band director at Syracuse University, and I did that for 2 years. I was under Dr. Robert Spradling, Bob Spradling, who was the director of bands then. And at that time, then I got my first marching band arrangement published thanks to, well, two people. Robert Smith was certainly a key in that, but also Dr. Pat Rooney was recording some for Warner Brothers Publications back in those days. And I got some marching band arrangements published, so that was really, really great. I did 2 more years at Syracuse after my first 2 years as the director of bands when Bob Spradling went back to, when he went on to Western Michigan University as the director of bands there. And I got offered a job then my second year as director of bands at Syracuse to come work for Warner Brothers and to be an editor there. And at first I was like, I don't really want to do that because that would get me out of teaching. And I really like teaching. I really like conducting. And I was afraid of that. And I was sort of at a crossroads where I had to decide, do I want to be more of a writer or do I want to be more of an educator conductor? And the person who convinced me to go down the route that I have obviously done with most of my career now is Sandy Feldstein. And I owe a great debt of gratitude to him for a lot of things. And it actually makes me a little bit emotional thinking about it. Because Sandy convinced me to go into publishing. And he did it this way because I always felt like he was an educator as well, who just happened to be educating from a different perspective. And he said to me, if you work with a band, you affect those 100, 200, 300, how many people you have in your program. But if you can write a piece or you can write a pedagogical book, you can affect thousands and thousands of students. So you're teaching, but you're teaching in a different way. And that really hit home with me. And I said, sign me up. I want to do that. So I got into that. And then I started having my first pieces published around that time. And as a matter of fact, just a sort of a side story, the name of my new company, Excelcia Music Publishing, is from my very first piece that was published called Excelsia, which I'm sure some musical band directors know. But I still do a lot. I still do a lot, of course, writing commissions and things like that. But I still do a lot writing marching band. I've been fortunate to write for most of the major college, university marching bands in the country in one way or another, whether they played some of my published arrangements or I've written pieces or arrangements for them custom. Sandy then went on from Warner Brothers to Carl Fischer, and he asked me to come along, and I was like, you bet, I'm coming. And when we got to Carl Fischer, it wasn't in a great state, and I feel I'm proud about the fact that Sandy and I together and with the great team that's there and still there, a lot of people that are still there, have done a great job rebuilding and really having a renaissance of that great old publisher. So that's been the last 18, almost 19 years of my life, and editing and selecting music for concert band and for orchestra and instrumental things and overseeing all the publications of Carl Fischer. And then, as I told you, now I'm on to my own adventure with Excelcia Music Publishing.
I want to try to kind of draw out a little bit of this idea of you being young and starting to do your own arrangements. And I know that you've had exposure to Robert W. Smith and Charles Carter and these great composers and the people who sort of were able to push you in that direction. you have any advice for maybe a young band director or a band director out there who maybe does some arrangements for their own band or is thinking about that, thinking about composing, not necessarily to get published, but maybe what they could do if they don't have any experience in composition arranging, where they could kind of get some knowledge and skills towards that?
Well, first of all, I think arranging anything for your kids to play, they will love it. But secondly, when you write music down on paper and you get it performed, even if it's not your own music, if it's an arrangement, there is a sense of ownership that you have in that. And then also that's the best teaching. You hear something played, you go, oh, I made that range too high for the trumpets, or that didn't work. And you learn from that. And you can use your students, obviously, as a laboratory to do that. But I always tell people who want to do this, start simple. Take a Bach Chorale and just find one that's in an appropriate band key and just write it out for your kids. And you might say, well, there's already a lot of that available. It doesn't matter. Take the opportunity to write it out for your students and then see how that sounds to you and in terms of the way you orchestrate it. And I guarantee you'll be, and the other thing that it's going to tell you is you don't need a lot in order to sound full with an ensemble. Bach Chorales is 4 parts. It's SATB. It's really all you need in order to make the ensemble. Bach Chorales sound great with the band, and that's really all you need. So the other thing that I think that you learn from arranging is you learn what makes a great song or a great piece good, and you get inside someone else's music, which that can only then bleed off on you. That can only rub off on you and really get into the fabric of who you eventually will become. And because I still do marching band arrangements, I always say that's kind of my palate cleanser. I write marching bands arrangements on the off season of doing my own music because I learn something from every arrangement and every tune that I do about really some really cool compositional thing that composer has done. And it might even be, what you would consider an inferior composition, like on the radio or whatever, a pop tune for pep band. But there still might be one little twist in there compositionally that is interesting, that you can then sort of put in your bag of tricks to use at a later point in time, and helps you become who you are. Yeah,
there's no question that arranging and also studying the scores of others. If there's a march you're playing with your band, take it apart, see how it's put together.
Oh, sure. Well, the other thing to figure out early on is you don't need a lot to make it sound like a lot. You have to have economy in what you do, and that's why I said the Bach Chorale concept, starting simple, is very good, because unfortunately a lot of young composers try to add in too many things, too many layers, too many things on top of each other, and it doesn't really work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you talked about this. I saw a clinic you did in Texas, right? About how to pick good music.
Right.
You talked about that. Avoid pieces that have, how did you call it? Bad counterpoint or uncomfortable counterpoint?
I call it uncomfortable counterpoint. And often what happens with young composers and arrangers is they want to try to write line, which is a good thing, but sometimes they'll write counterpoint or harmony parts with the melody that don't really fit with the actual chord structure.
Right.
And so you get these sort of passing chords that I'm not even really sure you call them chords, that don't really work. And sometimes people who listen to them, because to be honest with you, they're in published pieces too. And that's what I tried to point out in that clinic, is that you have to be careful as a band director picking literature, to pick music that you've looked at, that you look at the skill and the craft of the composer to see if they don't do that sort of thing. And they have the skills not to write bad counterpoint.
So let's go in that direction. Let's talk a little bit about what you're looking for in music, because you edited a lot of music. You saw thousands of scores probably.
Yeah. Oh yeah, thousands. Yeah.
And so you must have seen your share of good and bad music. And so if you're a director and you're going through the 2,000 pieces that are released in the Pepper catalog or every year by the publishers, how do you start to wade through that?
Well, first of all, don't rely just on the recordings, but also I commend you as a band director for taking the time to try to find new music, because it is daunting to listen to all that music. It's kind of my job to know what is published by all the other publishers, but I can't do it. It's just so much. It's voluminous amounts of music. So I feel bad for you as a band director trying to do that. but it's really important. It's probably the most important part of your job because it is your curriculum. So you have to drill down. And even if you listen to the publisher's recording and you go, wow, that sounds great, you've then got to drill down and look at the score. You've got to analyze it and figure out what it is about that piece that you like. What can you teach with that piece? And is it going to be good for your students to play it? Because to play music that just because you like the way the recordings sound is really not the best way to go in selecting literature. So I think that's really important to consider first and foremost, that you really look at the music and carefully consider. And obviously, and I've done some blogs on this, but you have to consider, does the composer have craft? Does the piece say something? Even if it's for a beginning band, does it have some sort of sophistication musically that's going to keep the interest of you and, most importantly, your students? So I think that's essential when you're looking for music, that you don't just go, "Ooh, I like that," and then play it. It's got to have some. To me, it's got to have some educational value if you're going to use it in an educational setting.
Right. And hopefully that intersects with the student interest. It doesn't always, of course.
No, my experience has been, students like what I guess you'd say would be more candy music. Mm-hmm. But if you give them the good stuff, they eventually realize that the good stuff is better than the candy. I just remember from my own teaching and from the good teachers I've seen, if they push, for example, beautiful, lyrical, wonderfully written lyrical music, the students at first will push back on that, thinking, oh, slow music's boring. But eventually they'll come to realize that's their favorite music.
And so, Larry, you mentioned mentors and you talked about some teachers that you had. And what do you think the value of mentorship is in music education?
It's essential. I mean, you as a teacher are finding, the next generation of great players, the next generation of probably doctors and lawyers for that matter, the next generation of composers, all those things. And so it's your responsibility as an educator to mentor those students and point them in the best direction you can. But I can say from my personal experience, having good mentors along the way has made all the difference. Does that mean that talent's not important? Of course not. Talent is one essential part, but you have to have people who guide you in the right direction and the best use of your talent. And then the other thing is, which is maybe not necessarily mentorship, and we can probably go down this rabbit hole too, is that it's really a lot of hard work. So finding students to mentor and to coach them and to guide them down their path is really essential for an educator. And it's been really essential in my career. And it's something that I really try to give back to young composers. I do try to continue to teach when I find somebody that I think has the chops, has the talent to be successful as a composer in the publishing realm. I do try to guide them down the path and help them. And even I always remember to my very first rejection letter, which was from John Edmondson, which of course is a composer many of you know. He rejected me in the nicest way possible, sent me a 3-page letter, told me that my music had potential, was very encouraging, and then gave me words of wisdom on what to do next, where to take the pieces to submit, how to submit, a lot of information that as a green kid teaching middle school band, I didn't know. I didn't know how to do all that stuff. So I try to do that. I try to get back with, of course, doing clinics. When people send me pieces, I try to, if I reject them, let them down as nicely as I can and give them encouragement. I try to do it with clinics that I do, presenting clinics on picking literature or doing blogs and things like that on, how to get published. I just did one of those, which is on my website that people can check out. So it's real. I find that's a big responsibility. As I said, I still am a teacher at heart, and I want to continue to teach. It's just from a different place.
So, Larry, it's funny that I have a Larry Clark rejection.
That's accurate. Yes.
Yeah, it wasn't my first.
Right.
It probably wasn't even my 10th, but yeah. So rejections are part of the business if you want to be a commercially published composer. And so, I guess I would amplify your message and just say that you have to be persistent. You just have to keep trying and improving.
It's very important that people understand if they want to be a published composer. Number one, that shouldn't be your goal necessarily. You should write music for yourself first, for your creative need first. And then if it becomes successful or gets published, I always like to say that's a happy coincidence.
That's a good way of putting it.
It's not necessarily should be the end goal, because I'm here to tell you from somebody who's had a lot of music published and has what you would consider a lot of success in the publishing business in pieces being published. You're not going to become a rich person on getting one band piece published, or even 10 or even 50 or 100. It's just, that's not the mode of operation here. So you really have to focus on making sure you're doing it for the right reasons first. Because I can tell you, I have gotten into the rut, especially after you have some success, you start to get in the rut of trying to follow up on your success. And that's a bad thing. Whenever I sometimes slip into the mode of, I'm going to write a piece that sells today, you will, number one, not sell, and number two, the music will be terrible. You have to stay true to your art and to what makes you and what makes it artistic and fill the creative need that you have. And again, if that is successful, it's luck.
Yeah, no question. I would agree with all of that. You're certainly not going to get wealthy, at least not in my experience.
No. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say that.
So let's talk a little bit about that, since we mentioned getting rich and not getting rich. And again, with the caveat that no one's getting rich here. But you and I have had some conversations about the idea of being commercially published. And when we say commercially published, I'm talking through one of the companies with a contract versus composers. And there's a handful of them who are quite successful who are self-published. And I know this is one of the conversations that I have with composers on the show, is sort of that commercial publishing versus self-publishing question.
I am a product of the published world because I started at a time being published. My first arrangement was published in 92, so it's been a while. That really was before the self-publishing sort of mode of operation got started. What I find that in seeing both sides of the equation, I get paid as a composer, but I'm also an employee for a publishing company and now an owner of one. It's really a matter of the benefit that you see to what a publisher does for you. First of all, it lets you focus on your creative work, where you don't have to worry about sort of the business part of the equation. The other thing that I think is really important that composers seem to forget is legacy. If you get music published, then somebody is championing. I didn't say that. Championing. I can't even say it. They're looking out for your legacy. They're looking out for the future. What happens after you're gone with your music? I get concerned about people who self-publish. What then happens to their music after they're gone? Professional recordings. That's something that I could not, if I were on my own, be able to do. For any kind of monetary way. I mean, obviously we can get good college bands and sort of those sorts of things, but it's really difficult to get, a really great ensemble to really record and play well, middle school band music, for example. A distribution, there's no way you're going to get your music all over the country and all over the world for that matter, because I've had pieces performed all over the globe, which still I still go, how does that happen? But it's really a cool thing. And then the promotion and things like that. But I will add to that I see why composers today want to be published on their own. I see that they see that there's a monetary value for them. And I also see that the publishing business has been the same for a very long time and hasn't really changed and hasn't really adapted to the times. And to be honest with you, that's one of the things that I'm going to try and do with this new company that I've started. And that is to do something different. Because I think what we're doing now as publishers in by and large is not as helpful to the composers as it used to be. And I think that's the reason why composers are going down the road of publishing on their own, because they don't see what benefit the publisher offers to them. Well, that's something I hope to change.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that there are aspects of the traditional publishing model that, as a composer, you look at and you kind of raise your eyebrow. And you're a composer as well, even though you're an owner of one. I mean, the percentage is very low. I don't know if most of the listeners may not know, but it's only 10% that the composer keeps.
10% of the retail price, but it's also 50% of any licensing mechanicals. Like that's recordings and things like that. Yes.
That's something that especially a young composer would look at and say, whoa, not understanding that the benefits that you say, because it's often easier to look at those negatives. And I think this is true in most life. We look at negatives because they're easier to kind of quantify.
I guess it's just a matter of, do you want a small amount of a larger pot, or do you want a larger amount of a smaller pot?
Right. Exactly.
But you also have to remember, by getting the smaller amount of the larger pot, there are services. And the other thing I really didn't mention is your music is vetted. Your music is edited, especially if you get your music published by a reputable publisher with a good editor. We're going to help you make your music better. And I am proud to say that I often hear from my composers who work for me, they feel like at the end of the process with me, that they feel like the piece is better than when it started.
Mm-hmm. I've heard that about you, Larry, that you're a composer.
I'm thankful.
Yeah, that people talk about how you sort of work with them to improve the piece. I've heard that from other people. So I
want to help them be successful too. That's my job.
Right. And now when we have this conversation, I don't want this to be confrontational, like one model's better. And I like the way you put that, as it's really individual.
Sure.
And it's also, I don't know if people quite understand how difficult it is to get your music into schools as a composer. Right. I mean, you're competing not only against John Mackey and Robert W. Smith and, just to take two names from each world, but you're also competing against John Edmondson, who you mentioned, and Alfred Reed, and composers who have been passed away a long time now.
Well, I've often told the composers who I often get submissions of marches. They want to write a march that's like, Sousa or Fillmore or King or whatever. My problem with that sometimes is, you guys realize you're competing against Sousa and Fillmore and King and Alfred and all the famous march composers. So, that's a tough road. It's like, writing pieces for orchestra. Well, you're competing against Mozart and Beethoven and Mahler and Tchaikovsky. I mean, it's difficult.
Well, I think that was a piece I sent you, Larry, was a march. And that's exactly what you told me.
It's a challenge because you're competing against established literature. And, band has gotten to the point now where it has a big enough volume of repertoire that there's just so much competition. And besides the fact that there's 2,000 pieces, as you said, that come out every year, it's mind-boggling.
It really is. It is. It's interesting that you talk about the march. I know you've written several marches that I've looked at over the years. What's the value of the march?
Well, in my opinion, it's twofold. Well, maybe more than that, but historically, it's important to the band movement. The other thing is, I think that marches are a great teaching tool because they have everybody play all the time, which is a great way to work on what I call the 2D band sound, or the gray, where you mix all the colors together and you get the gray. So you're working on a solid band foundation, good balance, good blend, good intonation, all that stuff. So I think, and it also has basic harmonic progressions, which then help teach the students the basics of harmony and oral training. Form, it's got really obvious forms: intro, first strain, second strain, break strain, trio, that sort of thing. So that really is obvious to the students. So then you can start talking about those things. So I think there's really so much you can teach from a march. And the problem I think most people have with marches is they're boring to listen to the way most of them are played. Okay. We need to play them with more variety of dynamic contrast, with better phrasing, but changes in orchestration. Sousa and Fillmore and King, they never played the marches the way they were published. They changed orchestration. They took out the counter melody the first time. At the trio, they played it legato and only the woodwinds, and then they added the brass. So they made changes to have creativity and variety to a march, which then makes it most interesting and more interesting to listen to. And I can tell you, from a band, you go to band concerts, you go to any community band concert in America, you start playing a Sousa march and people are happy. They enjoy it. They want to hear it. They love it. So why are we going to shy away from something that our audiences want? Right.
The community band, the bread and butter is the march. And it's interesting that you say change the orchestration, because if you look at an original Stars and Stripes Forever, anyone who's played that piece knows it doesn't say anywhere to drop the brass out.
No, It doesn't on all of those because that was the tradition. You just published them in a quick step size, and it was for outside. And for example, a lot of those old marches, the clarinets were stratospheric because they wanted them to project outside. Well, it doesn't make sense for them to do that sitting down on the stage, so you make some adjustments to that.
All right, Larry, so there's so much more to talk about, but we're approaching the half an hour mark here. And so I kind of want to get into a little bit more about your publishing company. And if you want to talk for a few minutes about what you're trying to do and how people can sort of interact with you and engage the music that you're about to start publishing.
Well, first of all, this literally is several weeks ago that this has sort of gotten off the ground. So I'm still in the formulating stage of getting Excelcia Music Publishing off the ground. This isn't, I wanted to make it clear to everybody, this isn't me trying to really self-publish on my own and then throw a couple other people's music in it. This is a real company. This is going to be a real publisher. I'm going to do professional recordings. I'm going to do what I know. And I'm fortunate that I'm able to do that. And I have been thinking about doing that for a long time. And now is the time. And I've found a way to do that. And so I want to make that clear first. Secondly, I want to provide music for educators that inspires your students, inspires you, that is musically sophisticated, but maybe fits within the technical limitations of the students. It's going to be a full service publisher in the fact that we're going to have band, choir, and orchestra music and related products, books, and things like that. But one of the things I want to focus on a lot is the composers. And I want to focus on that the composer really is the most important thing, because I really believe that band directors, orchestra directors, it really doesn't matter. They buy on composer and the actual piece rather than the publisher. And I think that goes to the core of why people self-publish, because they feel that they are the brand. And I agree with that to a certain extent as well. So my focus is going to be more on promoting the person as the composer and their music and what they have to offer, and not necessarily the brand itself as, Excelsior Music Publishing. So that's really something I'm really going to try to do. I'm going to try to offer some things for composers, which I haven't formulated exactly yet, on how it will be better for them to do publishing with us and, help them earlier in the process. Because one of the things that's frustrating to composers is you get a piece accepted with a publisher, and then it takes a very long time before you actually see any financial reward to that. So I'm working out some details on how we can assist with making that a little bit easier for composers at the outset and not have to wait so long. The other thing is I really want to focus on helping composers promote themselves. We as composers, I would say by and large, we don't do a great job because we just want to write music. We don't do a great job of promoting ourselves and how wonderful the music is. So as a publisher, I want to help those composers do a better job of that, because I think the promotion from the publisher is great, and we do need to do more of that. But we also need to focus more on actually helping the composer get their own name out there, because social media and websites and all that stuff is really important today with band directors trying to connect with that composer. And that's the third thing is I want to get the people who use the music of the composer to have a way to interact and connect more with the composer, whether that be through, sort of Skype things or commissioning or whatever. I'm going to try to help the composers in that process, and especially the young ones who don't know a lot about how that's actually done.
I've talked to some composers about their commissioning process, and some composers add Skype sessions in as sort of a value add to that commission.
Sure.
That seems like a pretty obvious choice these days, because it's so easy to do this from your own home.
Right.
To visit a band room. And honestly, if someone's commissioning you, what's 45 minutes to spend with their band, really?
Well, I think it's just it's an educational benefit to the students, because I've done it countless times, whether I've gone or whether I've done it through Skype or FaceTime or whatever. the students are just, their eyes are so wide open because number one, they think composers are all old or dead. And number two is they've never talked to one. They don't know what that is. There's such a mystery behind composition with people. And I think that makes it more real to them. That makes the music more real to them, more personal to them. And I think that's just a great educational part of doing that sort of thing.
All right, Larry. So nuts and bolts advice for a director out there who might want to commission a piece.
It depends on the composer, of course. But first of all, obviously, they should pick a composer that they like their music. I think you also should share with that composer, the music that you do like, because then that would sort of stimulate the composer to think, well, this is the type of piece that they're looking for. I know every composer is different on how they approach, getting information about what the commissioning group wants. But it's really simple. I mean, today you have email and phone and stuff like that. It's really simple to contact us composer types. Most of us have websites now. You can communicate with us very regularly. I answer my own email. It's not like I have an agent or anything. So, I get back to the people. We start to have a conversation about timeline. When do you want the piece? When's it going to be premiered? What are the strengths and weaknesses of the group? What type of work are you looking for? I then ask them to listen to other pieces of mine to give me an idea of, especially if I'm doing a commission for a middle school band, what grade level are you looking for? What piece of mine is sort of the hot spot for your group? So then that gives me a general idea of the technical limitations that I have to be considered as part of the commissioning process. And I know some composers are different, where they want you to commission them and then just let them write what they write. I'm okay with feedback. I'm okay with with talking to the students. Matter of fact, I've done it often where I've talked to the students before I write the piece. Matter of fact, I did a commission locally for an orchestra at Harrison School for the Arts here in Lakeland, where I wrote them a piece over time. I wrote some of it. I took it to them. We played it. We discussed it. They gave me some suggestions, which were some really good, some not so good. And then I went back to my writing space and then continued on. So I'm okay with that. I've had the students suggest titles with my help. Before I write the piece, I've had for example, I wrote a piece for a band in Arizona. Unfortunately, it was for a tragic climbing accident of one of their band members, and we were discussing. Of course, they were very emotional about it, and they all had the sort of Lance Armstrong wristbands, the rubber wristbands made. After this band member died, and the wristband said "Forever Climbing." I'm like, well, that's the title of your piece right there, folks, and that pretty much then just stimulated so many ideas for me musically. So interacting with those students even before the process was really helpful. Of course, you're going to get suggestions like, "Well, I'm a Barry sax player. I want a solo." Well, yeah, okay, but but you do try to work in those sorts of things. At least I try to do. So being open and honest about what you need as a composer, but then open and honest about what the commissioning group wants as well is really important.
Yeah. Have you ever turned down a commission?
No. The only thing that I've turned down is I have been asked probably more times than I would like to write pieces for students who have passed away in various incidences. And often in those situations, for whatever reason, they ask for Amazing Grace, and I just have to tell them, I'm sorry, I just don't. I don't think the world needs another arrangement of Amazing Grace. I love Amazing Grace, and for example, like Frank Ticheli's Amazing Grace, absolutely stunningly beautiful, but I don't think that should be the only piece that people consider to be a setting for some sort of a circumstance like that. So I try to force them in a different direction on those sorts of things.
Sure.
Now, have I had commissions where I have had one instance where I wrote a lot of the piece, and I think honestly I missed the mark because I guess I just didn't communicate clearly what the band needed in terms of grade level. And to be honest with you, I wrote them 2 pieces because the first one was just a little too easy for the group because I misinterpreted what they were looking for.
I'd like to take a short break from our episode to invite you to listen to my music at markjconnor.com. I am always seeking opportunities for collaboration. If you are interested in commissioning a new piece of music for me, having me work with your students in person or via Skype, or to just say hello, please drop me a line at markjconnor@gmail.com or through the contact form on my website. All right, Larry, let's get back to it here. And so, Larry, I'm going to ask you the questions I ask all of my guests to get your perspective on these. And so the first one is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
Well, competition in order to motivate without sort of punitive damages, I guess you might say, I think is healthy. Getting students to, play better because there's a competition for some sort of an award. Master musician, for example, down here in Tampa, they have a thing called Master Musician where the students can pass off all 12 major scales and Rubank etudes and all theory and all this stuff in order to get an award called Master Musician. I think that's fabulous. It's when it becomes a problem for me is when that becomes the end game for the program. And yeah, I said earlier, I've been so involved in sort of the competitive, I guess you'd say, drum and bugle corps. I haven't been as involved in the competitive marching band scene. Some, and even that, if kept in proper perspective, is fine up to a certain point. But I feel like sometimes programs get to the point where that is the tail wagging the dog. And I think that's bad. Number one, it's so expensive. And is it really important to spend all that money for that one portion of your program? I remember telling a band director once who did a lot of that and, said they spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars for their marching band to do their show and to have their semis and all their equipment, all that stuff. And I said, well, how much do you spend on your concert band? And they looked at me and said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, just think about if you had $100,000 you could spend on your concert band. You could have the best people in the world come in and teach master classes for your students. You could commission, the world's greatest composers to write music. I mean, there's so much that you could do with that money in other ways that would be more educational for the students than just producing one marching band show that you do for 8 minutes on a football field. Again, what these people are doing is unbelievably fabulous and intricate and sophisticated. I just think if that is the focus, then that really becomes a problem.
I think, Pete, there's probably someone out there who's saying to themselves, but it's the public face of my program.
Oh, I absolutely believe that in the fact that, I was a marching band director at Syracuse, and that was obviously the face of the program there as well. You have to do it well because you know what? You can teach good quality phrasing and good quality music and all those skills necessary to sit down and play outside as well.
Yeah, no question of that.
But again, if that is the only means, it's really the same. It would be the same if you said, well, the jazz band is my focus of my program. And you went crazy on the competition side of the jazz band. It would be the same sort of thing. So it has to really be kept in perspective and kept to the point where it's not the only thing that you do.
All right, Larry. So I know you post wonderful pictures of your family and your children's accomplishments. And so I want to ask you, how do you achieve work-life balance? And how have you found that over the course of your career?
Well, I've had sometimes better than others. As you said, I have a large family, of course, my wife, and I have five boys. So there's a lot of activities and things. They're getting older now. I have 2 in college. And 2 will go on the way here pretty soon in another year. So it's a challenge. But that's the reason why I changed in 2003 from working in the Carl Fischer office to working from home. It gave me the opportunity to have some flexibility. But the other thing is, I think that's really important to point out is you have to focus on your own health. And I tell band directors this all the time. You have to focus on yourself first, because if you're healthy and you're fresh and your life's going well, personally, it's only going to affect you positively, professionally. I'll even suggest a book that I've read and I reread all the time. It's called The Rhythm of Life. It's a book by Matthew Kelly. It does have a little bit of a religious component to it, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I think that's probably a part of what we need to consider as people. Whatever your beliefs are, believe in something. But he talks about that, number one, the secret weapon is sleep. He talks about you really should sleep the same amount every night. You should sleep at the same time every night. And you say, well, that's really a super ideal goal that I can never achieve. Well, but that's the point. It is the ideal goal. Do I fail on that? Yes. But I can. You could ask my wife. I really am a stickler about it's time for me to go to bed. And do I miss out on things that maybe are, I miss out on seeing the Jimmy Fallon show, which I think he's hilarious, but that's okay, because I wake up and I'm ready to go and I have more energy. Of course, eating well and exercising and all those things are really super important as well. So I think that's super important that you try to do that. And then that will help you keep your focus, what's important in your life.
All right, Larry. So what are the big challenges that you see facing music education, and how can we best meet them?
Well, to me, I've seen just over the last 10 or 15 years, such an overemphasis placed on testing, and then testing relating to teacher merit and teacher evaluation and performance. And I think that's a flawed thinking, especially somebody who came out of education and teaching, and also having, my wife who's in education and a lot of friends who are in education. It's really taking a toll. So I think that's a huge challenge. I'm hoping that it's a pendulum and that it'll swing back the other way, where people realize that's not really helping students learn better by testing them, and that they need to allow teachers to do their jobs, which is to be creative. Obviously, testing hurts arts because it's not part of the test. Yeah, they still have tests, end of course exams and stuff like that in music and in band and orchestra and whatever too. But by and large, the focus is on the cores, the math and the science and the English and that sort of thing. So that's a challenge for teachers, because I hear all the time, and I see it on posts on Facebook where people say, I've seen my band once this week because we've just had testing, and all these different things. So there's all these distractions and that are causing scheduling issues. So I see that as something that I hope there'll be a pushback on in the communities and in the world and in the country, that's not really helping us educate our students. And that music is obviously so important to everyone that we've got to let teachers do what they do well and not get in their way by asking them to test. Because proving that a teacher is good because their students scored high on a test, I think is very, very flawed thinking.
Larry, if you could plan it out, what would be the final work that you'd conduct?
Boy, that's super tough, because there's so many pieces by other people that I love to do and love to conduct. And it's almost impossible to pick one of my own, because I think of them as like children, which child do you like better than the other? Well, they're different. So, I mean, that's a challenge, but I know you probably will press me and try to pick one.
I will.
That's what I figured. So I would have to say at this moment in time, because that's the other thing. I think of pieces as sort of a moment in time. I like to think of them like photographs. They're memories. You have a memory, you take a picture of it, and then you move on and make more memories. But if I had to go back and I had to pick something right now, this moment in time, I'm very, very proud of a piece called Whispers. And you mentioned earlier that most people pick a slow tune. Yeah, it's a slow tune, and it's not very difficult. It's grade 2.5, 3 maybe. But I wrote it for somebody very special to me, and I discussed him earlier, is Sandy Feldstein. He was a great mentor to me. And unfortunately, we lost him to cancer back in 2007. And when I found out that he was diagnosed with a brain tumor, I started to write the piece. And it was a really hard piece to write, but I'm really proud of it. And the thing that I'm most proud of, and the reason why I would pick this piece, at least today, is that his family really, right at the end of his life, played that piece for him, a recording of that piece. And it was the last piece of music he ever got to hear.
Oh, wow.
So that was very, very powerful for me. It still is. And when I tell students that, or directors that, it really has a important meaning to them too. And it really helps bring out the emotional quality. The piece isn't difficult. It's just for me, it's jam packed with, the emotion of it.
Wow. Larry, is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote? I know we've talked about Excelcia.
Nothing specific. I'm, of course, in the throes of always writing. I write on a regular basis. And that's one thing I tell young composers is write every day, write something, just write, just keep working. Of course, Excelcia Music Publishing is foremost on my mind right now, and a lot of non-musical things. I'm trying to set up the company. I'm trying to get office space. I'm trying to get phones and and computers and furniture and things like that. So that's really foremost on my mind right now. But there'll be more to come, and I hope that your listeners will look out for more information about that, because I'm very excited about what I think we're going to be able to produce and get out there to the world. And I'm excited to show that. But I also will say that's going to take some time, and I'm not going to rush it, and I'm not going to push out products and pieces until they're ready. So you may not hear a lot right now. You may not hear a lot, maybe even the rest of this year. But it will be coming. And I'm very excited about the process. And I have a renewed sort of energy and lease on life now that I have just a change. And obviously sometimes in life, change is a good thing, to just give you a boost and move you forward.
Well, I will most certainly link the website in the show notes and make sure that my listeners are aware of it. All right, Larry. Well, I am actually at the end of my time. I have to take my kids to tennis. Speaking of work-life balance.
Absolutely. That's always something.
And so, Larry, how can people get in touch with you?
Of course, like most people now, I have a Facebook page that's Larry Clark Composer. If you'd like to like that page, I have my own website, larryclarkmusic.com. Of course, on all those pages, you can link to email through me and get in touch with me that way. Excelcia Music has its own website now. ExcelsiaMusic.com, and it's EXCELCIA, so people spell it correctly. And so one of those three ways we can reach out. And here's the thing. I love to hear from people who play my music. I love to know what you're doing with it, how it's working for your students, and also what's not working or what you need. Because again, I take the responsibility of being a composer that helps people teach with the music that I write. I take that very seriously.
Larry, thanks so much.
Thank you, Mark.